We often read headlines that say abortion is a settled issue here in Canada, but is it really? There's still a large number of Canadians who are opposed to the termination of a tiny unborn being with a heartbeat. Is there any realistic hope of changing the majority's view on the issue? Today's guests believe there is. Alyssa Galobe is one of the co-founders of Right Now, a Canadian pro-life organization, and she joins us now from Calgary. Alyssa, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thanks for having me.
So Alyssa, what is your organization all about, and how do you differ from other pro-life groups?
Well, our organization is solely focused on nominating and electing pro-life candidates. And this is very different from other pro-life organizations because for the past few decades, groups have basically focused on street activism, the life chain holding signs up on the road, or the March for Life doing rallies on Parliament Hill. But there have been very few organizations that have focused on the electoral process. Other organizations focus on lobbying politicians after they're already elected. But what in our research with myself and my co-founder, Scott Hayward, of our organization is that we can make the most amount of difference, especially in the nomination process. And so we started this organization to focus solely on that area.
So what kind of success have you had so far in nominating pro-life politicians?
We've had a lot of success. We started in 2016, and one of our first politicians that we helped in the nomination process was 19-year-old Sam Osterhoff in Ontario, who was an ardent social conservative who went up against the president of the party. And no one knew who he was. Very few people paid attention to him. Everyone thought it was going to be a landslide victory of the president of the party, but he ended up winning because social conservatives and pro-life voters got involved. They bought their nominations and they showed up and supported Sam. So we often use that as an example just of how powerful the pro-life vote can be in the nomination process.
Now, political parties are obviously very aware of what you're doing right now and who you are. What kind of tactics are they using to maybe try and stop your message and really stop you in your tracks here?
Well, it all depends on who the leader is, because if we do have a sympathetic leader or even one who's pro-life that we've seen in the past, they very much respect democracy. They respect open nomination process. We've also had terrible leaders provincially where they disqualified candidates the night before if they don't like what they're saying and for no reason at all. So it's been kind of a whirlwind in terms of who we elect and how successful we are in terms of the leader. But, in the last two federal elections, which is the two that we've been around for in our existence, we've actually been able to increase the number of pro-life politicians, both in 2019 and 2021. So the Conservative Federal Party is far more pro-life now than it was 5 years ago, and we only expect to continue that success.
Now, in your recent research, Alyssa, what percentage of the population do you think is actually against abortion? And how many of these people would potentially consider getting involved politically?
Yeah, so recent polls, the last major poll was done by Angus Reid in 2020, and it showed that 34% of Canadians thought life began at conception. And so in a country of 38 million people, that's about 12 million Canadians who are pro-life. In terms of where they fall on the pro-life spectrum, the same poll also showed that the majority of Canadians want restrictions on abortion in every single province, including Atlantic Canada and Quebec, which are seen as more of the kind of progressive provinces. So this is a unanimous thing that Canadians do want, and the legislature, especially federally, has to keep up with the public opinion on this issue.
So what kind of legislation would you like to see changed? Many political parties, including the Conservative Party of Canada, has already said it's a non-starter and abortion will remain.
Yeah, so I think, again, that public policy has to reflect public opinion. And so if the majority of Canadians want restrictions on abortion and the Supreme Court and our versus Morgentaler said it was up to the federal legislature to implement these laws, then it's our duty as Canadians, as voters, to elect politicians that will reflect that policy and will pass legislation. And that's really what the goal of the game that we play is that to elect those politicians that do reflect that public policy. And so even in the Conservative Party, some leaders have said, we won't reopen the debate. But every single time there's a leader that says that, there have been multiple backbench MPs which have put forward different types of legislation. And we see the support for that legislation growing and growing each year.
So in your opinion, what are the odds of seeing a pro-life federal Conservative leader being elected? Any word yet on any pro-life candidates, such as maybe Leslyn Lewis, who's an outspoken social conservative running?
Yeah, I'm absolutely confident that a pro-life leader will run, and I'm very hopeful that it will be Leslyn Lewis. She hasn't announced yet, but the signs are there. And if that's the case, then to me, it's really a make or break time in the Conservative Party, because they can continue to elect kind of the establishment candidate that's been around for decades, that has the same talking points and the same message and the same sole focus on economic issues and not touch anything cultural. Or we can go in a new direction with a new leader, a fresh perspective, no hidden agenda, someone who can actually win in the GTA and different suburban parts of Canada, and who also has that conservative policy that I think so many Canadians are in search of.
Now, for any viewers, Alyssa, who might be watching this program right now and thinking about getting involved politically in some fashion, what would you say to them? Like, which areas do you need help in specifically?
Well, like I said, this leadership race is very important. So even if we put together lists of personal pro-life contacts that we know, and reach out to them during the leadership race and ask them to buy a membership to support the pro-life leadership candidate, that can exponentially increase the number of votes, and that's the number of points that a pro-life leader needs to win. And just also to join our organization, so we can let you know when there's a pro-life candidate in your riding, so you can vote in that nomination, and we can elect more and more pro-life politicians across the country.
You know, it's interesting to see polling revealing that a majority of Canadians are in fact opposed to gender-selective abortions and late-term abortions. Now, why is it that legislation to this effect never actually gets past first base?
I think it's mostly because the pro-life movement hasn't focused in this area of electing pro-life candidates as much as we've needed to. So even though our numbers keep increasing in Parliament, we still don't have enough to pass pro-life legislation, which is ultimately the goal. The goal is to elect 170 pro-life MPs, which is 51%, so we can pass these types of pro-life bills, especially bills that reflect public policy. So I think that in many of these situations, even though support for these bills has increased over the last few years, it's not enough to pass in the House, and that's what we're fighting for.
Now, there are many who believe that opposition to abortion is simply coming from the Christian fundamentalists. Is this true, or are there other groups championing the pro-life cause?
I mean, the majority of new Canadians hold social conservative values, and each party recognizes that this is a large voter base that parties need to win, especially in the GTA. And often people think, GTA Toronto, they think progressive, you have to be as red as possible, as liberal as possible. But the truth is we're not talking about downtown Toronto. We're talking about all the different communities. I lived in Toronto for 10 years. I know all the different communities, all the thousands of churches that are in that area. And those are the people that we can really target, who hold these views, and intensify them so that it crosses over to who they vote for politically. So I think that this is an easy and low hanging fruit of a population to actually get them to vote for our issues, because they're issues that are dear to their heart. And so I think that that's really what we're going to focus on in the future.
So it's more the 905, not the 416 that we're talking about. It could be maybe the Durham region, it could be out, Port Perry somewhere, or maybe Binbrook out by Hamilton, that area. So not so much Toronto Centre, like right in the middle there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, those downtown Toronto ridings only are, a few ridings in 338. So the majority of them are kind of outside the downtown core, and those are really where new Canadians tend to go. Even in Vancouver, which we had a lot of success in the 2019 federal election, we won the majority of those swing ridings there, and we elected pro-life candidates. So in these different areas, we have had success, and we will continue to do so, because those are where a lot of pro-lifers live.
Now, I understand that you see abortion as more of a human rights issue. Can you explain?
Well, like I said, because there are so many different people with so many different view backgrounds and religious denominations, uh, abortion is a human rights issue. It's not necessarily a religious issue, even though many religious people hold this view. But in our organization, we have dealt with and have so many different supporters from all walks of life. And the fact is that you don't need to be religious to understand that scientifically abortion kills a human being, and that you want that to stop in Canada. And that's really the message that we focus on, and we deal with how we can do that politically in our country.
So let's say the Conservative Party of Canada elects its new leader, maybe Jean Charest, it could be Pierre Poilievre, or maybe Leslyn Lewis. But let's say the new leader happens to be pro-choice. How are you going to work with that leader to help further your cause?
I think the same way we have done, with the last leader, in that we've just focused on nominating in the nomination process. Many of these leaders, although they hold the pro-choice or pro-abortion perspective, do respect the democratic process of the nominations. And so we're able to intensify people in different ridings that we're focused on and get them involved and vote and win in those nominations. So even with a ardently pro-abortion leader like Erin O'Toole, we were able to increase the number of pro-life politicians in the last election. And if that happens in the future, we'll continue to focus on that area.
So any advice on how to better identify pro-life voters and to gather them together cohesively to influence our nation?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of different ways. Social media is a huge help. We also have door knocking campaigns where we ask people to sign a pro-life petition, so we can sort of gauge where they're at in the neighborhoods that we need. Going into different churches, church presentations where people are generally pro-life but don't understand how that translates politically. We also do presentations just to communities and different ridings that we're focused on. So there's lots of different ways that people can help educate, the community that they're in, and intensify people's votes so that they can nominate and elect a pro-life candidate in the future if they haven't already.
So, Alyssa, I want to ask you specifically and personally, how did you get involved and why do you have a passion for being a pro-lifer?
Well, I really started getting involved in my teen years when I saw a picture of abortion victim photography, and that kind of stuck with me. And then throughout university, I was pro-life and I was involved in different campaigns. And then right out of university, I decided to work full time in the pro-life movement, not really understanding how vast it is in all the different areas. And so the very first place that I started out was a crisis pregnancy center, volunteering every day. And so we would deal with abortion-minded women who were set on having abortions but might have changed their mind at the last minute, or realized that there were other choices or other options for them that we provided. And that really intensified my pro-life stance, and it's one of the driving reasons behind why I do what I do politically today.
So what do you say to somebody who says to you, look, this is my body, my choice? How do you approach that conversation?
Well, a lot of people who say that, when they find out, when you ask them why they made that choice, the number one thing that they say is, I thought I had no other choice. So I think providing people with other options and having more informed consent is a big part of that, because I'm all for my body, my choice. But if abortion was solely about a woman's body, she'd be aborting herself. But she's not. She's aborting a separate individual human being with separate DNA. But I think the real kind of way to explain that is to show that there are other choices. And when women are faced with real choices that actually help them, then they vastly don't go with abortion.
Alyssa Golob is one of the co-founders of Right Now, a Canadian pro-life organization. Thanks so much for joining us today from Calgary.
Thanks for having me.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and thanks for watching.